Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. The White House says Brittney Griner should never have faced trial, urges Russia to accept substantial offer to release her following her 9-year jail sentence. Mirroring the war in Ukraine, China virtually seals off Taiwan following U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's defiant visit to Taipei. And Channels Television's Maria Bird is invited onto a special panel at the National Association of Black Journalists, a first for journalists working for a media outlet outside the USA. And 3 more ships laden with Ukrainian maize depart the country's ports, Chernomorsk and Odessa. We begin this morning with reactions from American women's basketball star Brittney Griner's case. She had been convicted of deliberately smuggling drugs into Russia and sentenced to 9 years of jail time in a case that has raised concerns she is being used as a political pawn in Russia's war against Ukraine. A Russian court found her guilty of deliberately bringing cannabis-infused vape cartridges into the country, a ruling that U.S. President Joe Biden has called unacceptable. Her sentencing could now pave the way for a U.S.-Russia prisoner swap that would include the 31-year-old athlete and an imprisoned Russian who was once a prolific arms dealer. Ms. Griner's lawyers said they would appeal a verdict they said was absolutely unreasonable. Her defense team said the court had ignored all evidence they had presented, as well as Ms. Griner's guilty plea.
Total disappointment. You know, when we saw Brittney, I think it was Tuesday, and we told her, see you on Thursday, and she said, see you on Doomsday. Very upset, very stressed, and she can hardly talk, honestly, so it's a difficult time for her.
Today, U.S. citizen athlete Brittney Griner, who is admired by millions of fans in the United States as well as here in Russia, was sentenced to 9 years in prison for nothing more than an intentional oversight. This is a miscarriage of justice. The U.S. Department of State has determined that Ms. Griner was wrongfully detained. Nothing in today's decision changes that determination.
Meanwhile, the White House has urged Russia to accept the, quote, substantial offer made for the release of Ms. Griner, convicted now of drug charges. Both White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre and National Security spokesperson John Kirby said Griner should never have faced the trial, where she was found guilty of bringing cannabis-infused vape cartridges into Russia. Ms. Jean-Pierre said the offer was also made for U.S. citizen and former Marine Paul Whelan.
I won't go into detail.
Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittney. She never should have had to endure a trial in the first place. As you all know, we have made a substantial offer to bring her and Paul Whelan home. We urge Russia to accept that proposal.
And I know everybody is making some assumptions here about what that proposal is. I won't go into detail about it, but it's a serious proposal. We urge them to accept it. They should have accepted it weeks ago when we first made it. We have seen similar maximum sentences for drug charges of foreigners in Russia. They typically, it's just historically speaking, foreigners that are arrested on drug charges and then convicted under their system tend to get much higher sentences than would be Russian citizens.
And in the last hour, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow is now ready to discuss prisoner exchanges with Washington through an existing diplomatic channel. The Kremlin had previously warned the United States against resorting to megaphone diplomacy in the case of Ms. Griner, saying it could only derail efforts to secure a potential swap. The court's decision would place Brittney Griner in 9 years in a penal colony, a harsh penalty that keeps her fate entwined with a geopolitical showdown over the war in Ukraine and ramps up already intense pressure on President Joe Biden to win her release. The U.S. contends that she is among several Americans who who have been, quote, wrongfully detained by Russia, used as bargaining chips in the increasingly hostile relationship between Moscow and Washington. And staying with more reactions on the Griner case, Phoenix Mercury basketball players Scarlett Diggins-Smith and Diamond DeShields said they were devastated and felt helpless after their teammate was sentenced to 9 years in prison by a Russian court. Speaking at a news conference following their 77-64 loss to the Connecticut Suns in the Women's National Basketball Association, they said they had approached the game with a heavy heart.
It's not anything we're politicizing. It's a human being, and this is our real-life friend and real-life sister. So imagine if your real-life friend or real-life sister is out here. And I don't expect everybody to give a damn, but we really do. If we come out here and we're still supposed to play the game, nobody wanted to even play today. How are you supposed to approach the game, approach the court, and with a clear mind, and the whole group is crying before the game? Because you try to honor her and you try to come out and still play hard for her. And you know, regardless if she's here or not, right now, we still gotta try to keep her spirit alive, to honor her spirit, and to try to get some momentum for the team, something to feed off of.
There's also word from the head coach of the Phoenix Mercury, Vanessa Nygaard, who explains how she and her team watched Brittney Griner being sentenced by a Russian court in what she described as a heartbreaking moment. Nygaard gave a news conference prior to a game against the Connecticut Suns and praised the basketball star's strength and courage.
It's just heartbreaking. And, you know, we know that this verdict is unacceptable, but that doesn't make it sound any better. And to hear her words and her apologies and just trying to send love and prayers to her and strength, I was really amazed by her courage and her strength as I was listening to it today. Just, I couldn't imagine being in that situation. And she was so courageous and like continuing to be a good role model in so many ways of this impossible situation. And she showed great strength. Watching the verdict as we were preparing to do our shoot around, and then just to go out there and do basketball just doesn't seem like the thing today. But we know we weren't hanging our hopes on the Russian justice system. We know that the Biden administration and all of our government officials are going to work hard to bring her home, and that's the path she's going to come home. But mostly we're just focused on continuing to support the people that have to do this hard work for us. And also I know it's a tough decision by our administration. They're going to have to do some exchanges that are tough. But the women of the WNBA, the fans of the WNBA, our community of women's basketball and basketball in general does support this. And we really just want to have BG home with us.
And Brittney Griner's former high school basketball coach said the WNBA star is misunderstood and expressed disappointment in her imprisonment, conviction, and sentencing. Debbie Jackson coached Griner at Houston's Nimitz High School, where she graduated in 2009. Jackson was a coach at the school from 1991 to 2012. She said it was not long until Griner mastered the game that she became the #1 girls' high school basketball player in the country after carrying the Nimitz girls basketball team to a 25-5 record in her senior year. Despite her overwhelming success in court, Jackson said Griner has remained humble and caring, qualities Jackson ascribes to Griner being perceived as an outsider in the past. And in other stories, China deployed scores of planes and fired live missiles near Taiwan in its biggest drills in the Taiwan Strait, a day after U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a solidarity trip to the self-ruled island. China's military confirmed multiple firings of conventional missiles in waters off Taiwan as part of planned exercises in 6 zones set to run until noon on August the 7th. It activated more than 100 planes, including fighter jets and bombers, and over 10 warships. Taiwan's defense ministry said it scrambled jets to warn away 22 Chinese fighter aircraft that crossed the Taiwan Straits median line into its air defense zone, and said troops fired flares to drive away 4 drones that flew above the area of its Kinmen Islands. It said missiles fired by China flew high into the atmosphere and constituted no threat to it, responding to public concern about whether they passed over the main island of Taiwan. Meanwhile, U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has praised Taiwan, pledged U.S. solidarity, and said her trip through Asia, which led to the unprecedented military drills by an angry China, was never about changing the regional status quo. Ms. Pelosi and a congressional delegation were in Japan on the last stage of an Asian trip that included a brief and unannounced stop in Taiwan, the self-ruled island that Beijing considers its own, and prompted an infuriated Beijing to hold live-fire drills in waters around Taiwan. Her stop in Taiwan, the highest-level visit by a U.S. official in 25 years, came as Tokyo, one of Washington's closest allies, has become increasingly alarmed about China's growing might in the Indo-Pacific and the possibility that Beijing could take military action against Taiwan.
You may be more interested in, again, what the Chinese did while we were traveling. And we have said from the start that our representation here is not about changing the status quo here in Asia, changing the status quo in Taiwan. It's about, again, the Taiwan Relations Act, the U.S.-China policy, all of the pieces of legislation and agreements that have established what our relationship is, to have peace in the Taiwan Straits and to have the status quo. They may try to keep Taiwan from visiting or participating in other places, but they will not isolate Taiwan by preventing us to travel there. We've had high-level visits, senators in the spring, a bipartisan way, continuing visits, and we will not allow them to isolate Taiwan. They are not doing our travel schedule. If we do not speak out for human rights in China because of commercial interest, we lose all moral authority to speak out about human rights any place in the world. We're trying to find our common ground. China has some contradictions, some progress in terms of lifting people up, some horrible things happening in terms of the Uyghurs. In fact, it's been labeled a genocide. So again, we must work with China on issues that relate to the climate crisis, being 2 of the biggest emitters, and we can learn a lot from China in that regard.
We will work collectively together in multilateral coalitions to make sure that the voices of democracy, as messy as it can be, will always be heard. And we will not be afraid to call out anyone who is in violations of human rights. If we don't speak up and speak out in silence, as which I'm sure that China would want, they surely do not want us to continue to talk about what's happening in Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. We're going to speak up and speak out for human rights, human dignity, and democratic process.
The National Association of Black Journalists has convened in Las Vegas, Nevada, for their first in-person annual conference since COVID-19. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has been one of the leading news stories in all newsrooms across the world, and now a panel will provide first-hand accounts of reporting on the ground in Ukraine during the Russian invasion. During this conference, some of the leading black journalists in the world will gather to discuss accurate reporting on conflict and war during the age of social media. The panel will also provide insight into international reporting for U.S.-based media organizations or international media companies as foreign correspondents. Other topics such as reporting COVID-19, the impact of the Black Lives Matter on media, covering political campaigns, as well as others, will be examined. The conference is expected to run till August the 7th. Our very own Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, will be on a panel entitled Reporting on the Ukraine Conflict and International Affairs. Let's talk now to Maria, who joins us from Las Vegas, where she is attending that conference. Morning to you, Maria. You are the only black journalist working for a news organization outside of the United States that is serving on this Ukraine conflict panel discussion. How does that come across to you?
We are making strides as a media in looking at how the global act on not only the U.S. media, but also the world media. And so it is with great pride and great appreciation of channels that I have this opportunity to be able to serve on this panel to discuss a issue that not only impacts the U.S., but impacts the entire world. And as we know, I've been fortunate to join your show, and that's probably where they've seen me talk how the U.S. is impacted by the Ukraine conflict. And so I know that this panel will be very interesting, and I think that they're looking forward to international news outlets are looking to learn about the Ukrainian conflict from a U.S. perspective, media organizations and to international audiences.
Let's take a look at some background of this gathering itself, the National Association of Black Journalists. I know that this year it's talking about the war in Ukraine, amongst other topics, COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, and so on. But give us a little context within which this association operates in the United States.
This is the largest association of Black journalists, and this is also Hispanic journalists as well. For the past couple of years, the National Association of Black Journalists and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists have come together for the annual conference. And so this is the largest contingency of those groups. There are various chapters throughout the country where in their own states they actually advocate for fair treatment of African American and media journalists of color within the news organization. But also fair and equal access to opportunities in reporting for journalists of color.
Indeed, Maria, we're due a break at this point, Maria, so let's just do that. Let's take a break, and when we return from that break, we'll continue our conversation with you, so don't go anywhere. Maria Bird joining us from Las Vegas in Nevada. But when we come back, and that's after the break, Russian energy giant Gazprom says sanctions are threatening the repair of critical equipment for the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Let's continue our interesting conversation with our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, but who is joining us today from Las Vegas in Nevada, venue of the National Association of Black Journalists annual convention in person. Maria, you were trying to make a point that even though it is the National Association of Black Journalists, it does encompass quite a number of other groups and does deal with a number of subjects that may not be immediately looked at as being immediately directly related to the media. Please conclude that point.
Yes, I was just stating that for several years, the Association and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, the annual conference, really looking at how media is impacted by people of color as a whole, not only equal access to reporting jobs and positions, but also fair and equal treatment of how the news is reported on people of color. And so it's a dynamic conference that is full of very interesting topics and panels. And I know that this panel will be one that is going to probably open up a new door, a new venue for really understanding reporting and news outside of the United States and how individuals are reporting each and every day on issues that impact the larger global community, but also from a U.S. lens as well.
Let's look at the media reporting of this conflict. That's the war in Ukraine in the United States. And I dare to imagine that that has had quite a bit of impact on what public perceptions and opinions have been about what side the U.S. is on, about what the U.S. should be prepared to do, both to help Ukrainians and to help bring the conflict to an end and all of that, even though it has had costs for U.S. citizens as well.
Exactly correct. As you and I discussed before, the U.S. has been a leader and really has been the first one. Even before the conflict began, they expected that this conflict would occur, and they expected that Russia was going to invade. And so President Biden has taken this on as kind of his flagship position. And he has gathered and galvanized the rest of the world to support Ukraine in this conflict. And this is one of those, as you talk about and you think through, I'm sure you can remember reporting on various wars that have occurred. This is one that is going to continue to change the landscape of reporting, and specifically, how African Americans have opportunities now to report on the grounds, obviously going right there into Ukraine, and most who have been able to go into Poland right there as that is a NATO area, sanctioned area for Americans. And so this conference will be discussing really how do you report, especially in the day of social media. Things have changed so much. And so when you talk about breaking news and you talk about being able to break that story as it relates to a war, how is that done in this new environment? Not only are we in social media environment, we're also in a post-COVID environment. And so things have changed just tremendously in the media community as we.
Now, before COVID, before the war in Ukraine, and in fact, before all that we've been discussing recently, there had always been those who argued that the media in the United States had an ideological bent in recording or reporting world events, as well as events within the United States. Those who are familiar with U.S. media would talk about ABC and Fox and CNN and all of that, reporting various things from their various angles, ideological positions, being on the right, being on the left. Do you think this has had some level of impact on how the media itself is perceived within the United States? Do people just look at CNN and say, oh, look, we know you're on this side, or look at a Fox and say, well, we know you're on this other side, and therefore everything is a reinforcing pattern for their audiences?
You're exactly correct. And I think, one of the things we'll hopefully get to explore over the next couple of days is really how media outside of the U.S. is very different in some ways than that. And, who watches Fox, individuals who have a very right-wing perspective will tune into Fox. You have others that might occasionally watch Fox, but CNN, you're going to have much more of a liberal, left-wing focused individual that's going to watch that as well. ABC, CBS tend to lean a little bit from most media's perspective to the left. Most Americans who are on the left side will kind of tune into those as well. And so you're exactly correct. I mean, these news outlets has really dictated, who watches what specific channels, shows here in the U.S. You'll also see some like MSNBC. There are a couple of other news outlets that are looking to kind of a little bit more balance. The media has been called on that. And to see some reporting trying to be more balanced, but it definitely has for, the last number of in the for the end of the Kennedy administration, an administration where you really started to see how they were able to get their messaging in their presidential administrations.
Indeed, Maria, of course, we can say that one of the media outlets in the United States that tries to be balanced is Channels Television, for which you work and for which you are being recognized at this event. Congratulations, and do have a good time in Las Vegas and Nevada. All right, a report from Amnesty International states that Ukrainian forces appear to have a pattern of placing troops and military vehicles in residential areas, including using hospitals as de facto military bases. Such actions violate international humanitarian law and put civilians at risk, and that's according to a report from Amnesty International. The accusation is based on research conducted between April and July in the east of Ukraine in 19 towns and villages, where evidence was found that Ukrainian forces launched strikes from within residential areas. In several cases, they were targeted by retaliatory Russian attacks, some of which then killed civilians. In 22 of the 29 schools visited by Amnesty, they said they found evidence of current or prior military activity. In 5 locations, they witnessed Ukrainian troops using hospitals as bases, which was a clear violation of international law. Most residential areas inspected were far away from front lines, and there were viable alternatives for military deployments, according to Amnesty International. The rights group said it was not, quote, aware that Ukraine tried to evacuate civilians from those areas as is required under international rules of war. But in responding to that report, Foreign Ministry spokesperson, talking about a Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, said Russia had frequently highlighted the methods described by Amnesty and had repeatedly reported that Ukraine is using civilians as human shields. Moscow claims it never targets civilian sites, contrary to accusations coming from Kiev, and that it took every precaution to mitigate risks to civilians when attacking Ukrainian forces in cities and villages. President Volodymyr Zelensky, in responding to the Amnesty report, said it could not be tolerated. He accused the humanitarian body of siding with, quote, terrorists after the organization had condemned the Ukrainian military for placing weapons in civilian areas in clear violation of humanitarian law. Speaking during a televised late-night address, Mr. Zelensky said Russia had deliberately targeted civilians queuing for water at evacuation buses and at public transport stops. The Ukrainian leader asked the European Union to release 8 billion euros for Ukraine that was currently blocked, saying that Ukraine could not be held hostage to their indecision or bureaucracy.
Від Amnesty International, який, на жаль,
We saw a completely different report from Amnesty International, which unfortunately tries to amnesty the terrorist state and shift the responsibility from the aggressor to the victim. There are no and can be no even hypothetically conditions under which any Russian attack on Ukraine becomes justified. Aggression against our state is unprovoked, invasive, and frankly terroristic. And if someone prepares a report in which the victim and the aggressor are allegedly the same in some way, if some data about the victim is analyzed while something that the aggressor was doing at that time is ignored, then this cannot be tolerated. Almost 200 religious buildings alone, temples and prayer houses of various denominations, were damaged or destroyed by Russian strikes. Nearly 900 medical institutions, over 2,200 educational institutions, dozens of universities, hundreds of schools and kindergartens. The occupiers repeatedly and deliberately fired artillery and mortars at people queuing for water, at evacuation buses, repeatedly fired at public transport stops. The Russian army did not stop before striking even at the memorials to the victims of the Holocaust, at cemeteries, at the camp with prisoners of war in Olenivka. There are no reports about that for some reason. This is much immoral selectivity. Anyone who amnesties Russia and who artificially creates such informational context where some attacks by terrorists are supposedly justified or supposedly understandable cannot fail to understand that in doing so, they are helping the terrorists.
And Turkish Defense Ministry says 3 ships loaded with grain under a recently concluded deal have left Ukrainian ports. The Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul, which groups Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish and UN personnel, said 2 ships were setting off from Chernamorsk and 1 from Odessa. The 3 ships, carrying a total of 58,000 tons of corn, have been authorized to leave Ukrainian ports as part of a deal to unblock grain exports. The Turkish Defense Ministry said on Twitter the Panama-flagged Nevista, carrying 33,000 tons of corn and going from Ukraine to Ireland, departed from Odessa port. The ship will be inspected by the Joint Coordination Center to the north of Istanbul. The second ship, the Maltese-flagged Orion, carrying 13,000 tons of corn, departed from a Chernamorsk port bound for Britain. And the Turkish Defense Ministry is saying that a team of inspectors in Turkey have just completed checking an empty cargo ship before it headed off to collect grain from the Ukrainian port of Chernamorsk under a deal to restart Ukrainian grain exports. The ministry published photos and Twitter showing the inspection team looking into the hold and other areas of the Barbados-flagged general cargo ship Fulmar S, which was at anchor in the Black Sea just to the north of Istanbul's Bosphorus Straits. Vessels to load Ukrainian grain are being inspected by Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish and UN personnel who are working at that joint coordination center in Istanbul. Let's talk now to Sergei Glebov, Associate Professor in the Department of International Relations at the Institute of Social Sciences in Odessa, Mekhinov National University. He joins us virtually from Odessa, there in Ukraine. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off from what we've just been reporting, the grain exports coming out of Odessa, amongst other ports in Ukraine. It does appear to be going smoothly. Does that come as a surprise to you, considering how all of this started?
This is the good sign indeed, absolutely good sign. At least we are watching the whole process being started in a more or less positive way. But let us do not forget that this is not just the will of Ukraine or the rest of the world. This is the will of Russia to let those ships go. Meaning that as soon as this situation is in the interests of the Russian Federation, it continues to be that for the next weeks or whatever. But once Russia understands that this is not the primary interest of its foreign policy at the moment, it may interrupt the whole process immediately. So, meaning that Russia is being driven by their own tactical and strategical interests. For the moment, it matches their expectations for many reasons. The first reason is to show the rest of the world that Russia is quite reliable and negotiable. This is the tool to support its image of the good dealer. The second one, Russia understands that at the moment there are no any chances to attack Odessa. That's why they can take some kind of a break to play another game vis-a-vis Turkey, vis-a-vis personally Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, which is about to meet Putin later today. So I believe that we're witnessing the temporal process of rearranging Russia's interest in the region, depending on the situation on the battlefield on the territory of Ukraine.
Ukraine, since this conflict started, Ukraine has come across from every angle as the victim and Russia as the aggressor. But it does appear as if for the first time, an international body is accusing Ukraine too of doing something or some things that are not completely in tune with international best practices, shall we say. And that is Amnesty International's report that Ukraine has been using residential areas and hospitals as military bases. This has been denied by Ukraine, but I'm wondering if you have a view about that. Is it a fair comment, especially since Amnesty International is on ground and went to those sites, so they're not talking from afar?
I do believe that this is absolutely an appropriate approach from the side of Amnesty International. We just heard the message from my President Zelensky as to the case, and I do think this is not the right way to equalize the aggressor and the victim. Ukraine is not the victim. Ukraine is trying to defend itself bravely, and it was a huge surprise for the many powers around the globe that Ukraine is still succeeding in its strategic aim to defend the whole country, to keep independence, and to pursue the victory in the end. From the side of the international law, there could be some shortages of the war period and the battlefield. But let us do not forget that Ukraine is trying to defend, is trying to counterattack. Ukrainian army is trying to do as much as possible in this crazy situation. And of course, Ukraine is standing, and Ukrainian army is standing on the side of the civilians, and sometimes it's ready and it has to attack from the civilian sides of the battlefield. I do think that Amnesty International is playing basically Russian narrative as to the case. And, from the general principle perspective of this situation, this is not the case of threat on the territory of the Russian Federation. This is the territory of Ukraine, and Ukraine has to do all the possible to defend civilians, also by attacking from the civilian sides if it had happened. This is not the problem. The problem is how to treat, how to examine, and how to propose to the rest of the world the war narrative in Ukraine. I do believe that, unfortunately, Amnesty International is going and continuing the Russian narrative as to the bad Ukrainians on the bad Ukrainian homeland.
You are in Odessa, so I want to end our conversation this morning on that note. You are in Odessa, and before this grain deal got underway, Odessa was attacked in the run-up, in the immediate aftermath of the agreement on the deal. So the question is, do you feel safe? What's been the situation like on ground in Odessa since that time and now? And what's everyday life like? Do you have water? Do you have easy access to medicines and food? Or is it, a mixture of all of this?
Odessa is more or less safe, of course, comparing to the rest parts of Ukraine, closer to the real war, to the real battlefield. But this is not just the war of tanks. This is the war of missiles, rockets, and Ukraine, as well as any part, as any city, as any town in Ukraine, it doesn't matter whether it is eastern part or western part or central part or the southern part, all the people on the territory of Ukraine under the permanent and constant threat. So we do have water here, we do have electricity here, but we also have Mykolaiv, the city of Mykolaiv, right next to Odessa. We have occupied Kherson, and we do know that Russia is trying to prepare its attack on Odessa very soon. There are different schemes how to do this through the Kryvyi Rih or some other destinations from the occupied already territories. So this is kind of the very temporal situation when Odessa can feel itself comparatively safe. But definitely, it's a big deal for the country. It's a big deal for the Odessa people to stand all together against the Russian invasion. And there are no any doubt that Odessa is pretty much safe in terms of the defense from the side of the Ukrainian army. And the most important thing that Odessa people are very extremely pro-Ukrainian in their souls and their minds and in their deeds.
Sergei Glebov, thank you so much for your perspective and for your time this morning. Do continue to stay safe out there in Odessa. We'll get back to you soon on the program. Thank you so much this morning. Yeah. After the break, Kramatorsk residents sell their belongings at a flea market as the city becomes an eastern fortress. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The Kremlin says that Russia's Gazprom would like to get back a Nord Stream 1 turbine that has been undergoing maintenance in Canada, but that it requires documents confirming that the turbine is not sanctioned. However, Gazprom announced yesterday that Western sanctions were hindering the return of the turbine from Germany and threatened future equipment maintenance at the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. In the latest development in the gas turbine repair route between Moscow and Berlin, the Russian energy major has laid out the reasons why the Nord Stream 1 pipeline is not fully back online and why getting repaired equipment back is impossible. Gazprom explains that the crucial part that is stuck in Germany after repairs in Canada should have been sent back to Russia in May. But the paperwork for its return is not in order, as it was issued by Siemens Energy and not the firm that is contracted to Gazprom. If the turbine is shipped to Russia, there's a risk that Canadian authorities will see this as a breach of contract and withdraw permission for further maintenance of turbines to be carried out on its soil. According to Gazprom, only one of the 6 main gas compressor units is currently operational at the station, with its daily delivery capacity reduced to roughly 20%. The remaining turbines require factory maintenance or overhaul. And the European Council has added a former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych and his son Alexander to its sanctions list. They accuse the former leader, who was ousted in a 2014 coup, of playing a role in, quote, undermining or threatening the territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, as well as its stability and security. The Council did not elaborate on why Yanukovych was added to the list, simply referring to him as pro-Russian. His son was accused of conducting transactions with separatist groups in Donbass. Previously, the only Ukrainian nationals sanctioned by the EU were those serving in government positions in territories Russia had taken control of during the military operation in Ukraine launched on February the 24th. Mr. Yanukovych has not yet commented on the EU's latest decision, nor has the government in Moscow. Most of the people targeted by the personal sanctions imposed by the EU and US, as well as allies across the world, are Russian military commanders, politicians and businessmen deemed to be close to the Kremlin. Let's talk to Laddie Williams. Morning, Laddie.
Good morning.
All that is there, but let's start from Germany, which seems to be the hub of all this. Now, the cabinet has agreed to a gas levy because of what we just finished hearing, the reduction in the supply. So there's a gas levy now for consumers, but it is not immediate. It's in October.
Yeah, it's coming, but it's one of those measures that we've seen Europe have to plan at this time to wean off Russian gas. We've seen they've been in talks, plans, to reduce their reliance on Russia for their gas, because now we've seen what Russia's done with turning off the taps, turning it back on. So they expect that there will be a shortage going forward, which most analysts actually see coming, with the sanctions being heaped on Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine. But at the end of the day, we've seen the suppliers of gas in Europe have to pay more at this time. So that cost has to be passed on, and obviously we know how
somebody's got to bear it.
Somebody's got to bear it, and obviously the consumers have to bear this one. They're looking at between 1.5 to about 5 cents, that's euro cent increase. That's coming in further down
in October.
In October. So at the end of the day, this is all feeding into inflation, because prices are going up, globally, and we've seen that happen because of rising, energy costs. And now we're seeing, Europe have a unique problem here, with their gas supply. So,
and now we know why.
And we know why, yeah. So they'll have to pay more. The consumers will have to pay more. And, the UNIPA, which is the biggest, recipient of Russian gas, they've also had to get a bailout from the government because of this cost. So, most of that cost that will be passed on to the consumers will be used to help the suppliers, of gas. So
to make up the difference.
Yeah, so it's Europe have a lot to deal with, right now with gas, and yeah, this is one of it, passing on the cost.
Indeed. Russian authorities are stepping up. They've always had that, but they're stepping it up, talking about the anti-dollar narrative now.
Yeah. It's been tagged the de-dollarization,
okay.
Because they've seen how, the sanctions, the financial sanctions, by the U.S. and its allies, have impacted their economy. Even though we see, inflation going down, we see some of that good data, coming out of Russia, but the cracks are
still there. They're very evident.
Yeah, evident. So they're looking for ways now to avoid, using dollars and euros. Now they've tagged them on friendly currencies. We have unfriendly nations now.
We have unfriendly nations, we have unfriendly currencies.
Unfriendly currencies. So they noticed that, authorities in Russia noticed that, individuals and, corporates hold a huge amount of, US dollars and euro. About $85 billion for individuals. And to them, it's worrying, because they need, to remove reliance on US dollars and euros, so that, and move to friendlier currencies. So now they have friendly, currencies, apparently. So they say, what?
Well, if you have unfriendly currencies, then you have friendly.
You have friendly currencies. So they say, what? Convert, we're going to allow you, sell, when it comes to the US dollar and euro, you sell those currencies to friendly currencies. That's the plan. The authorities are looking at this point. They're not going to allow you buy, the euro or dollar at this time going forward. So,
but they allow you sell what you already have.
What you have. So just to reduce, the reliance and, how much US dollar and euro is, going on, is circulating in the economy. So it's a plan, in the works. They're looking at it seriously. At this time they're stepping it up. They're already talking about how, the banking institutions there would also reduce their holdings, of US dollar and euro. So they're looking really serious right now. And obviously that's going to have an impact on, the dollar dominance, going forward. If it continues.
How are the markets doing? I mean, because this is the last day of this week. How have they done?
It's been an interesting, week for the markets. Investors were were expecting good things, for August, and they still are. August started off, on the wrong foot, but it's improving now. We're seeing, the markets actually closed green yesterday, talking about just the NASDAQ. But Asian markets closed green, thanks to Alibaba. They took the market up. It went about 4%. So, we saw, good moves there in Asia. Talking about the U.S., it's just the NASDAQ. We saw close in the green, do as well yesterday. Coming back here, we saw the NGX actually lose that. We saw bullish momentum coming, but it's lost that yesterday due to sell-offs with Boa Cement. The sell-offs continue again, so that pulled the market down yesterday. And we're seeing Bitcoin there ranging between 22,000 and $23,000. But we're looking out for that jobs report coming up later today.
All right, then. Thank you, Laddie. More of that, of course, will come on Business Morning and Business Incorporated later in the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a quick look at some sports. The United States Treasury Department has sanctioned Olympic gold medalist Alina Kabeva, who is rumored to be Russian President Vladimir Putin's girlfriend, in the latest round of penalties aimed at elites close to the Russian president. The Athens 2004 rhythmic gymnastics all-round champion was included in the latest wave of punishments on Russian individuals and companies related to the invasion of Ukraine. The United Kingdom and European Union had already sanctioned Ms. Kabeva. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, the U.S. has expanded its sanctions list as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. And finally, Kramatorsk residents gathered at a flea market selling toys, Soviet medals, and car parts in the eastern Ukrainian city. Alexander, a 52-year-old local resident, said he came to sell stuffed toys and have money for water and bread. Sitting at his improvised trading booth, Andre said that he's too old to evacuate the city. 63-year-old Sergei is worried that Kramatorsk may face the same fate as Izium and Mariupol. According to him, everywhere the Russians have been, there's just burnt land. A fierce fighting in the eastern Donetsk region continues, and hundreds of thousands of people are still living in combat zones. Thanks for staying with us. That's our package this morning. There'll be an update in the world today at 5 o'clock. Do join us for that. The show is back tomorrow. But for now, do have a pleasant day and weekend ahead. I'm Ladia Kiridulwale.